I didn't realize that my marriage might be unraveling because of something as small as a stain on a collar. It was a Thursday night, close to 11. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of my laptop fan and the distant sound of traffic from the Bayfront Road a few blocks away. I had been working in my home office for most of the evening, finishing a report that absolutely had to be sent the next morning. My job had been intense lately, and I'd gotten used to long nights like that. Holly knew the routine. Usually when she came home late from showings, she'd poke her head into the office, complain about how I worked too much, and then convince me to take a break with her. That had been our pattern for years. But that night felt different. I heard the front door open quietly. The soft click of her heels followed, echoing through the hallway. "Nick?" she called out. "In here," I answered, rubbing my eyes as I stepped away from the desk. She appeared in the doorway a second later. For a moment, I just looked at her. She was wearing a dark blue dress I hadn't seen in a while, the one she usually saved for dinners or events. Her hair was still styled perfectly, her makeup intact, like she'd just left the house an hour ago instead of spending the evening showing properties. But what really caught my attention wasn't the dress. It was the shirt she was wearing over it. A loose, oversized button-up. Definitely a men's shirt. I had never seen it before. At first I assumed maybe she grabbed it from somewhere while working. Holly dealt with staged homes all the time, closets full of random clothing props, furniture, decorations. It wouldn't have been the strangest thing she'd brought home. Still, something about it felt off. "Long night?" I asked. She exhaled dramatically and kicked off her heels. "You have no idea," she said, rubbing her neck. "That couple couldn't decide between two properties, so we ended up touring both." "Did they make an offer?" "Maybe next week," she replied, walking past me toward the kitchen. "They want to think about it." Her tone sounded normal, relaxed, if anything slightly annoyed, the kind of conversation we'd had hundreds of times before. I followed her into the kitchen while she grabbed a wine glass from the cabinet. That's when the first small detail caught my eye. As she reached up to grab the glass, the collar of that shirt shifted. On the inside edge of the fabric, barely visible under the kitchen light, there was a faint smudge of foundation. But it wasn't positioned the way it would be if she had been wearing it all evening. It was along the inside edge of the collar, exactly where someone else's collar would sit if she had leaned close to them. I stared at it for a moment. Then I noticed something else. A smell. Subtle but unmistakable. Cologne. Not mine. I've worn the same brand for years. Holly even jokes that she can identify me in a crowded room because of it. This scent was completely different. Sharper. Woodier. And it was coming from the shirt. "New shirt?" I asked casually. She glanced down at herself as if she had forgotten she was wearing it. "Oh," she said quickly, tugging the fabric off her shoulders. "It was in one of the staging closets." I got cold. She tossed it over the back of a chair like it didn't matter. Maybe that should have been the end of it. Maybe any normal husband would have just shrugged and moved on. But something about the way she answered felt rehearsed. Too fast. Too smooth. I didn't say anything else. Instead, I went back to my office and tried to focus on work. For about 20 minutes, I managed to convince myself I was imagining things, until I opened our banking app. Holly and I shared most of our accounts. It made things easier for mortgage payments, utilities, and the savings we'd been building for the renovation of our Bayfront house. I wasn't even looking for anything suspicious. I was checking whether a payment for some construction materials had cleared. That's when I saw it. A charge. Parking. Downtown Tampa. The Harbor Crest Hotel garage. Timestamp. Earlier that evening. I stared at the screen. That didn't make sense. Holly had told me she'd been showing a property across town all night. The Harbor Crest Hotel was on the opposite side of downtown. And it wasn't exactly the kind of place you casually parked unless you were staying there or meeting someone. I sat there for a long moment trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was an old charge that processed late. Maybe the location tag was wrong. Maybe it had nothing to do with tonight at all. But the timestamp said otherwise. I stood up and walked back into the kitchen. Holly was leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone while sipping wine. "Holly," I said calmly. She looked up. "What's up?" I held up my phone. "Quick question." "Okay." "There's a parking charge here from the Harbor Crest Hotel garage tonight." For a split second, her expression froze. Just a flicker. Then it vanished. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God, Nick. Seriously?" I blinked. "What? You're checking my transactions now?" she said, setting the wine glass down with a sharp little clink. "That's wow." "I wasn't checking you," I said. "I just noticed it." "It's a parking app," she said quickly. "Those things mess up all the time. It says tonight. Maybe it logged late. Maybe it was from earlier this week." Then she crossed her arms and looked at me like I was the problem. "You've been acting really paranoid lately." That caught me off guard. I asked about a charge. "Because you're looking for problems," she said. "You've been buried in work for weeks. Nick, you barely talk to me anymore." I opened my mouth to respond, but she kept going. "And now suddenly you're analyzing where my car is parked? That's not what You're being suspicious," she interrupted. The shift was so quick I almost missed it. A moment ago I was asking a simple question. Now somehow I was the one being accused. "You're imagining things," she said firmly. "There's nothing going on." The room went quiet. I studied her face. She looked irritated, almost offended, like the idea of my suspicion was ridiculous. After a few seconds I nodded slowly. "All right," I said. She relaxed immediately, picked up her wine, started scrolling her phone again like the conversation was over. And outwardly I let it drop. But inside my head, something had already changed. Because the foundation on that collar, the unfamiliar cologne, and a hotel parking charge from a place she supposedly hadn't been anywhere near, those weren't random details. Those were pieces of something. And for the first time in our entire marriage, a thought crossed my mind that I couldn't ignore. Something about this didn't feel like a coincidence. After that conversation, I didn't bring it up again. At least not out loud. Holly finished her wine, scrolled through her phone for a while, then eventually went upstairs. I heard the shower turn on about 10 minutes later. The normal sounds of the house returned, the same ones I'd heard thousands of times before. But something inside my head had already started moving. Once a doubt appears, it's strange how quickly your mind starts replaying everything you thought was normal. I went back into my office and sat down in front of my laptop, but I wasn't working anymore. The report on the screen blurred into the background while my thoughts kept circling the same question. Was that really the first strange thing? Or was it just the first thing I finally noticed? I leaned back in my chair and started thinking about the past few months. Little details surfaced one by one. At the time, none of them had seemed important. Now they started fitting together in ways I didn't like. The first thing that came to mind was the late showings. Holly had always hated evening property tours. Early in her career, she used to complain constantly about them. Buyers who came late in the day were indecisive, tired, distracted. "Evening clients never buy anything," she used to say. For years, she tried to schedule everything before 6. But about 3 months earlier that had changed. Suddenly she had late showings at least once a week. Sometimes twice. Most of them happened on Thursdays. At first I didn't question it. The market had been busy lately, and she had been excited about several new listings. But thinking back on it now, something felt off. She rarely talked about the clients afterward. Before, she would come home and give me the entire story, who the buyers were, what they liked, what they didn't. Lately those conversations had stopped. "Just a showing," she would say. Then she'd change the subject. Another memory surfaced. Her phone. For years Holly never cared where she left it. Kitchen counter, coffee table, couch cushions. Sometimes she'd even forget it in the car overnight. But recently it had started following her everywhere. And it was always face down. At first I assumed it was just habit. But now I realized something else. Notifications had started disappearing quickly. Her phone would buzz on the table. She'd glance at the screen, and then flip it over before I could see anything. Not dramatically, just casually. like it was nothing. I remembered one evening when we were watching TV together. Her phone buzzed 3 times in a row. She stood up immediately. "I need to throw something out," she said. She grabbed a small piece of trash from the coffee table and walked outside to the garbage bin. She stayed out there almost 20 minutes. At the time, I had joked about it. "What were you doing? Negotiating with the trash can?" She laughed, said she had taken a call from a client. But thinking about it now, that felt like a long call for someone standing outside next to a garbage bin. Then there was the perfume. That one bothered me the most once I remembered it. Holly had always used the same fragrance. I had actually bought it for her during a trip to New York years earlier. It became her scent after that. But sometime around early summer she started wearing something new. At first I assumed she bought it herself. When I asked about it, she just said casually, "I felt like trying something different." That answer hadn't bothered me then. But now I realized something else. She only wore that perfume on certain days. Mostly Thursdays. Another detail surfaced. The credit card. About 2 months earlier she told me she had opened a separate card for work expenses. Real estate agents sometimes did that for tax reasons, so I didn't question it. But she had been oddly insistent about it. "It's just easier if I keep everything separate," she said. I agreed. Now I wondered what else it kept separate. My thoughts drifted to the renovation project. The bayfront house we had bought the year before was supposed to be our long-term home, the place where we planned to stay for decades. Holly had thrown herself into that project. Obsessively. Design ideas, materials, floor plans. But there was something else about those conversations that suddenly stood out. She constantly mentioned one person, Cole, the contractor. At first that wasn't unusual. Any renovation project involved working closely with a contractor. But Holly talked about him like he was the authority on everything. "Cole thinks we should use stone here. Cole says the timeline could move faster. Cole recommended a different layout." Sometimes it sounded less like a contractor giving advice and more like someone whose opinion mattered a little too much. The strange part was how often his name came up. Not just in construction conversations. In everything. We'd be talking about the kitchen layout. Cole. The patio redesign. Cole. The new dock permit. Cole again. At one point I had joked about it. "Should I be worried about this Cole guy?" She laughed immediately. "Trust me, you'd like him," she said. "He's great at what he does." At the time, that answer felt harmless. Now it sat differently in my memory. Another small thing clicked into place. Thursdays. Almost every late showing. Almost every evening she dressed up more than usual. Almost every time she wore that new perfume. It was Thursday. I stared at the wall in my office as all those details lined up. One by one. Individually they meant nothing. But together, they formed a pattern. And patterns are hard to ignore once you see them. Upstairs, the shower turned off. A few minutes later I heard Holly walking across the bedroom floor. Normal sounds. Normal routine. Normal life. But sitting there in my office, staring at the dark reflection in my laptop screen, I had a strange feeling settling in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about one suspicious moment. I was thinking about months. Months of small things that didn't quite add up. And the worst part was realizing something else. If those pieces really did connect, then whatever was happening hadn't started tonight. It had been happening for a long time. And somehow, I had completely missed it. For the next couple of weeks, I didn't confront Holly about anything. On the surface, everything looked normal. We ate dinner together. We talked about work. We continued discussing renovation plans for the bayfront house. If someone had looked at us from the outside, they probably would have said we were just another married couple going through a busy season of life. But inside my head, things had shifted. Once you start noticing patterns, you can't really unsee them. And once that happens, you begin watching more closely than you ever did before. Not obsessively. Not like some jealous husband going through phones and checking every message. Just paying attention. And the more I paid attention, the more the little things stood out. Holly's phone almost never left her hand now. If she set it down, it was face down. If it buzzed, She'd check it immediately, then clear the notification before I could even glance at the screen. A few times I caught the corner of her mouth lifting slightly when she read something. A small smile, the kind people make when they receive a message they enjoy. But when I asked what was funny, she'd just say something vague. Work stuff. Another thing I noticed was how often she stepped outside. It started with small excuses, taking out trash, getting something from the car, calling a client. Every time she did it, she took her phone with her. Sometimes she'd be gone 10 or 15 minutes. Once it was nearly half an hour. One evening I even stepped outside a few minutes after she did, pretending I needed to grab something from the garage. She was standing near the driveway, back turned toward the house, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was soft. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she sounded different, warmer, lighter, the way people talk when they enjoy the person on the other end of the conversation. When she noticed me walking toward the garage, she ended the call quickly. Just a client, she said. I nodded. I didn't push it, but the list in my head kept growing. And then something happened that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had finished work earlier than usual and decided to stop by the house instead of staying downtown. Holly was supposed to be out meeting a potential buyer at one of her listings. The house was quiet when I walked in. Empty. Exactly the way I expected. I poured myself a glass of water, then headed toward the living room. That's when I noticed Holly's laptop sitting open on the coffee table. Normally she carried it everywhere with her, but that day she must have left in a hurry. The screen was still on. At first I didn't even look at it. I sat down on the couch and took a sip of water. Then my eyes drifted to the display and froze. There was a message thread open. Not email. Not work software, just a messaging app. And the name at the top of the screen made my stomach tighten. Cole. For a moment I just stared at it. My brain immediately started offering explanations. Maybe it was about the renovation. Maybe they were discussing materials. Maybe this was completely normal. But the preview of the last message destroyed that theory instantly. Last night was worth the risk. My chest felt like someone had just pulled the air out of it. I leaned forward slowly. Every instinct in my body told me to close the laptop and walk away, to pretend I had never seen it. But another part of me, the part that had been piecing together those strange details for weeks, needed to know. So I read. The messages went back months. Not professional. Not even subtle. They talked about meeting when I was working late. About Thursdays. About hotel rooms. About nights when I was too busy with work to notice. My hands felt strangely steady as I scrolled. There were photos too. Nothing graphic, but int asterisk made enough that there was no room for misinterpretation. Smiling selfies in places I didn't recognize. A picture of Holly wearing that same dark blue dress from the other night. Another message appeared near the bottom. Cole, did Nick say anything about the parking charge? Holly's response came a minute later. He noticed, but I handled it. I sat there in silence, reading, scrolling, absorbing every word. Then something even worse appeared. A conversation from a few days earlier. It had nothing to do with meeting up. It was about money. Cole had written, "Once the renovation loan clears, everything will move faster." Holly replied, "He trusts me. He'll sign the paperwork." Another message followed. "And after construction?" Her response came seconds later. "Then I file for divorce." My heart didn't race. I didn't feel the explosive anger people imagine in moments like that. Instead, everything went strangely calm, like my brain had switched into some kind of quiet survival mode. Because the next message made their plan crystal clear. Cole wrote, "And he'll still be responsible for the loan?" Holly answered with 3 simple words. "That's the idea." I leaned back slowly on the couch. The room felt incredibly quiet. Outside, a car drove past the house. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal life continuing like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, on the laptop screen in front of me, my wife had just described a plan to cheat on me and then leave me paying for a house she planned to keep. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't call her. I didn't storm out of the house. Instead, I did something much simpler. I took out my phone and started photographing every message on the screen, one by one, carefully, methodically. When I finished, I closed the laptop exactly the way I found it. Then I sat there for a moment, staring at the quiet living room. The strange thing was, I wasn't thinking about revenge, or confrontation, or even anger. I was thinking about one simple fact. Holly believed I was predictable. She believed I would sign the loan. She believed I would never see any of this coming. And that realization gave me a very different idea. Because instead of confronting her, I decided to do something they clearly hadn't planned for. I decided to stay quiet. The strange thing about discovering something like that is how quickly your emotions shut down. People imagine rage, explosions, arguments, but that's not what happened to me. What I felt was something colder, clarity. By the time Holly walked through the front door that evening, the laptop was exactly where she had left it. I was sitting at the kitchen island, casually scrolling through my phone like I had just finished work. "Hey," she said, kicking off her heels. "Hey," I answered. She walked over, kissed my cheek, and poured herself a glass of wine. Normal, completely normal. If someone had taken a picture of that moment, they would have seen a perfectly ordinary marriage. My wife greeting me after work. A quiet evening at home. But inside my head, everything had already changed. I knew about the affair. I knew about the hotel. And now I knew about the plan. The renovation loan. The divorce. Leaving me with the debt. And the most important part of all was that Holly had absolutely no idea that I knew. That night I didn't confront her. I didn't mention Cole. I didn't ask about the messages. Instead, I did exactly what she expected me to do. I acted normal. We talked about dinner, about a couple of listings she had that week, about the renovation timeline. At one point, she even mentioned Cole again. "Cole says we might be able to start framing earlier than expected," she said while scrolling through her phone. I nodded like that name meant nothing to me. That's good. Inside, I was already planning my next move. Because if Holly and Cole believed I was predictable, then the worst thing I could do was prove them right. That night, after Holly fell asleep, I got out of bed quietly and walked downstairs. The house was dark except for the light above the kitchen sink. I opened my laptop and started organizing everything I had photographed from her messages. Every conversation, every date, every reference to meeting when I was working late. I saved multiple copies. Cloud storage, external drive, encrypted folder. If things became legal later, I wasn't going to lose the evidence. Once that was done, I started writing something else. The timeline. Every detail I could remember from the last few months. Late showings, Thursday nights, the new perfume, the hotel parking charge. Cole's name appearing in every renovation conversation. The more I wrote, the clearer the picture became. This hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned, carefully, which meant I needed to be even more careful. The next morning, I did something Holly never expected. I called a lawyer, not just any lawyer, one that specialized in asset protection during divorce cases. His office was downtown, in a quiet building that didn't have a big flashy sign outside. The kind of place people visited when they didn't want attention. His name was Richard Alvarez, mid-50s, calm voice, the type of person who listened more than he spoke. When I finished explaining the situation, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "So," he said slowly, "your wife and her partner are attempting to secure a loan in your name for a property renovation, with the intention of divorcing you afterward. That's what their messages say. Do you have copies?" I slid my phone across the desk. He studied the photos quietly. Then he nodded. "You did the right thing by documenting this." I waited. What should I do next? He looked at me carefully. "The most important thing," he said, "is that you do nothing that alerts them." I wasn't planning to. "Good." He tapped the desk with his pen. "Right now, they believe you're cooperating with the renovation. They believe you'll sign whatever paperwork appears in front of you. That's the plan. And as long as they believe that," he said, "you have the advantage." He explained a few things after that. How shared accounts could be protected. How assets could be separated legally. What steps I could take quietly before any divorce filing happened. The meeting lasted less than an hour. But when I walked out of that office, I had something I didn't have the day before. The strategy. Over the next 2 weeks, I started preparing. Slowly, carefully. The first thing I did was open a new personal account at a different bank. Nothing dramatic. Just a place where my income could be redirected quietly. Then I reviewed every shared asset Holly and I had. Savings, investments, retirement accounts. I didn't move anything yet, but I made sure I understood exactly where everything was. The second thing I did was something simpler. I paid attention. Holly believed nothing had changed. She still had late showings. Still wore that perfume on Thursdays. Still talked about Cole like he was just the contractor. Sometimes she even showed me design ideas he supposedly suggested. Each time she said his name, I felt the same strange calm settle in my chest. Because the entire time she was talking, I already knew what she had written to him. Once the renovation loan clears, then I file for divorce. One evening she sat next to me on the couch with a stack of documents. "Hey," she said, smiling. "What's up?" Cole sent the preliminary paperwork for the renovation loan. I looked down at the papers. Exactly the moment she had been planning. "All we have to do is sign the final documents once the bank approves it," she said casually. I nodded slowly. "Sounds straightforward." She smiled, clearly relieved. "See? I told you this project would come together." I picked up the documents and flipped through them, pretending to read, pretending to think. Meanwhile, inside my head, one simple thought kept repeating. They believed they were setting a trap. But the truth was, I had already seen it, and now I was preparing to step out of it completely, without either of them realizing what was happening. The approval for the renovation loan came faster than expected. About 10 days after Holly showed me the preliminary paperwork, she walked into the kitchen with a wide smile and her phone in her hand. "Good news," she said. I looked up from my coffee. "What happened?" "The bank approved everything," she said, clearly excited. "Cole said we can finalize the documents this week." I nodded slowly. "That was quick." "I told you the numbers would work," she said, setting her phone on the counter. "Once we sign the final paperwork, construction can start immediately." She sounded relieved, almost eager. At the time, I wondered if that excitement was about the house, or about what she believed would come after it. Either way, I already knew something she didn't. I wasn't going to be there when that paperwork was supposed to be signed. Over the next few days, Holly talked about the project constantly. New deck layout, expanded windows facing the water, a redesigned kitchen. Every conversation somehow circled back to Cole. "Cole thinks we should move the staircase. Cole says the framing crew is ready. Cole told me the sooner we sign, the faster we lock in the schedule." Each time she mentioned his name, I kept my reaction neutral. Interested, supportive, exactly the husband she expected. But quietly, my preparations were already finished. I had transferred my personal income to the new account. I had secured copies of every financial record. And most importantly, I had already signed a lease. A small apartment across the city. Nothing fancy, just a place that was mine. Somewhere Holly didn't know about. The night before the loan paperwork was scheduled to be finalized, I started packing. Not dramatically, just quietly. Important documents first. Passport, financial records, backup drives, then clothes, a few personal items. Everything that mattered fit into 2 suitcases and a couple of storage boxes. The rest of the house remained untouched. Still looked like our home. Because in Holly's mind, still was. Around midnight, I finished loading the last box into the trunk of my car. The neighborhood was silent. Most of the houses along the street were dark. I stood there for a moment, looking back at the house Holly and I had bought together. For years, I had imagined our future inside it. Family dinners, weekend mornings on the patio, maybe even kids running through the living room someday. But standing there that night, something strange happened. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sadness. Mostly, I felt relief, because I wasn't the one who destroyed that future. She had. The next morning, Holly woke up alone. By then, I was already across the city, settling into the apartment. My phone buzzed around 8:30. Her name appeared on the screen. I let it ring. Then came the text messages. First confused, then worried, then angry. "Nick, where are you? Why are your things gone? We have the bank meeting today." A few minutes later, another message arrived. "This isn't funny. Call me." I stared at the phone for a moment before setting it down. There was nothing left to explain. The renovation deal depended on one thing: me, my presence, my signature, my income. Without those, the entire structure of their plan collapsed instantly. And that's exactly what happened. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. "She contacted the bank," he said, "and they can't proceed with the loan without your authorization." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "That's what I expected." He paused for a moment. "She also asked about accessing some of the joint funds. And I advised her that any major financial changes will require legal review. In other words, the money was frozen. The renovation was frozen. The entire scheme had just hit a wall." Holly tried calling several more times that day. Eventually, she sent a longer message. Not angry this time, pleading. "Nick, please just talk to me. I don't understand what's happening." I read it once, then locked my phone, because the truth was simple. She understood exactly what had happened. She just didn't understand how. From her perspective, everything had been moving perfectly. The renovation, the loan, the timeline. She thought she had everything under control. But the one thing she never considered was the possibility that I might disappear from the plan entirely. A few days later, I heard something else from my lawyer. Apparently, Cole had been involved in several phone calls with Holly after the loan collapsed. But those conversations didn't last long. Once it became clear that the renovation wasn't happening, and that there was no property to gain, Cole stopped returning her calls. Just like that, the contractor who had advised every design choice, every construction decision, every renovation detail, was suddenly gone. And honestly, that part didn't surprise me at all. Because people like Cole aren't usually interested in relationships. They're interested in opportunity. And the moment that opportunity disappeared, so did he. The divorce process started soon after. Holly tried to argue that my sudden move proved I was unstable. But the evidence told a different story. The messages, the financial planning, the conversations about the loan. Once my lawyer presented everything, her arguments became a lot weaker. The process wasn't pleasant. Divorces rarely are. But it was manageable. And more importantly, I wasn't trapped in the debt they had planned for me. The renovation never happened. The house eventually went on the market. And the entire plan Holly and Cole had built collapsed the moment I stepped out of it. Because the truth was something they never understood. Their entire strategy depended on one thing: my trust. And the moment that trust disappeared, everything else fell apart with it. The weeks after I left were tense but quiet. Most communication happened through lawyers. Holly tried to explain things at first, claiming everything had been a misunderstanding. But the messages I saved told a different story. Once the evidence was presented, her arguments weakened quickly. The renovation never happened, the loan collapsed, and the house eventually went up for sale. What surprised me most was how fast Cole disappeared once the money and property were no longer part of the equation. About a year later, my career took me to another city for a major project. That move turned out to be exactly what I needed. During the project, I met Claire, a structural engineer who valued honesty and straightforwardness more than anything else. Our connection grew slowly, without secrets or games. Looking back, I realized Holly's entire plan depended on me staying predictable. The moment I stepped out of that role, everything collapsed. And that gave me the chance to build a future that was truly mine.